Welcome to the channel. Today, we're breaking down the stories of the protagonists from the Fallout universe, the characters who shaped the wasteland through their choices and actions. If you enjoy Fallout lore content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's begin. In the Fallout universe, heroes are not born, they are forged in the crucible of impossible choices. Each protagonist begins as an ordinary person thrust into extraordinary circumstances, forced to navigate a world where morality exists in shades of gray, and every decision carries profound consequences. These are not superhuman champions, but flawed individuals trying to survive, to help, to find meaning in a wasteland that offers mostly death and despair. What makes these wanderers heroic is not their combat prowess or special abilities, but their refusal to surrender to the wasteland's cruelty. They could hide, could focus only on personal survival, could become raiders or slavers or worse. Instead, they choose to try. They help communities rebuild. They oppose tyrants. They make impossible decisions knowing they will live with the consequences. They carry the weight of the world on shoulders not built for such burdens. This is their story, a chronicle of ordinary people who became legends not through destiny or supernatural power, but through the simple, profound choice to care about something beyond themselves in a world that punished compassion and rewarded brutality. Part 1. The Vault Dweller, the first legend. The Vault Dweller's story began with simplicity that belied the epic journey ahead. Vault 13's water purification chip had failed, giving the vault's inhabitants perhaps 150 days before dehydration killed everyone. The overseer selected one individual to venture into the wasteland, find a replacement chip, and return before time ran out. It should have been straightforward. Leave the vault, locate pre-war technology, come home. But the wasteland had other plans. Stepping through Vault 13's massive door for the first time hit like physical blow. The vault had been home for the dweller's entire life, clean, safe, regulated. The outside world was none of those things. Harsh sunlight illuminated a landscape of twisted metal and broken concrete. Radiation counters clicked warnings. In the distance, something howled, a sound no textbook had prepared them for. Every instinct screamed to return to the vault's safety. But behind them, 100 people were counting on water that would not come unless someone found that chip. The first days nearly broke them. The Vault Dweller had been educated, trained in vault systems and basic survival skills, but education proved inadequate for reality's cruelty. The first raider attack left them shaking, having killed another human being in self-defense. The first time they saw a child begging for food, they gave away rations they needed. When they encountered their first ghoul, radiation-scarred and horrifying, every prejudice from vault safety films rose up before empathy reminded them this was a person, not a monster. Shady Sands changed everything. This small farming community welcomed the Vault Dweller, despite their obvious vault origins. Here are people building something positive, growing crops in irradiated soil, protecting each other from raiders, trying to create peace in a world of violence. The community's leader, Aradesh, treated the stranger with cautious respect. His daughter, Tandy, showed the dweller that life in the wasteland could include hope, laughter, even joy, despite the harsh conditions. When raiders kidnapped Tandy, the Vault Dweller faced their first real choice. They could continue the mission, focus on the water chip, return to the vault as quickly as possible. Tandy's kidnapping was not their problem, but walking away meant abandoning someone who had shown them kindness, meant letting evil go unchallenged because challenging it was inconvenient. The Vault Dweller chose to help, assaulting the raider camp and rescuing Tandy despite the risk and delay. This pattern repeated across the wasteland. The Vault Dweller kept encountering communities that needed help, individuals suffering injustice, problems that someone should solve. Each time, they could have walked past. Each time, they chose involvement over indifference. They helped Junktown establish law and order. They liberated the hub from merchant corruption. They protected the Brotherhood of Steel's scouts. They did not do these things expecting reward or recognition. They did them because no one else would, and someone had to. The Brotherhood of Steel represented a turning point, This organization possessed advanced technology and military discipline, but they had sealed themselves away in bunkers, hoarding knowledge while the wasteland suffered. When the Vault Dweller brought them evidence of the super mutant threat, the Brotherhood initially dismissed it as not their concern. The Dweller could have walked away then, could have written off the Brotherhood as irrelevant. Instead, they pushed, argued, and eventually convinced the Brotherhood that isolation was not survival, but slow death. The Brotherhood's help would prove crucial in the war ahead. Finding the water chip in the ruins of Necropolis should have been the end. 136 days of searching, fighting, and helping communities. But they had succeeded. The Vault Dweller could return home, deliver the chip, and resume their old life. But in securing the chip, they had learned about the super mutants, the Master's army, capturing humans and transforming them through forced evolution. They had seen the bodies of those who resisted. They knew what was coming. Returning to Vault 13 with just the water chip meant condemning everyone they had met to transformation or death. Shady Sands would fall, the Hub would fall, Junktown would fall, Tandi, Aradesh, all the people who had helped them would face the Master's army unprepared. The Vault Dweller could save their vault and sacrifice the world, or they could risk everything to stop the threat at its source. The choice was not really a choice at all. The Vault Dweller had changed during their journey. They had started as one person trying to save 100. They had become someone who could not stand by while thousands suffered. The water chip could wait a bit longer. The Master had to be stopped. The journey to Mariposa and the cathedral tested everything the Vault Dweller had become. They gathered allies, Brotherhood paladins, rescued humans, even a super mutant named Marcus who retained his intelligence and rejected the Master's vision. They fought through army after army of mutants, each battle a desperate struggle against enemies far stronger than any human. But they persevered because surrender meant not just their death, but the extinction of humanity as they knew it. Infiltrating the cathedral required stealth, cunning, and willingness to see the Master's vision firsthand. The Vault Dweller descended into the depths beneath the cathedral, past devoted cultists and mutant guards, into the heart of the Master's domain. What they found there defied description, a massive biomechanical intelligence sprawling across an entire chamber. Richard Gray transformed into something simultaneously brilliant and monstrous. The Master spoke with voices that resonated in the Dweller's mind, telepathic words carrying absolute conviction. The Master showed them his vision of unity, of humanity transformed into being strong enough to survive the wasteland. He offered the Vault Dweller a place in that unity, a chance to evolve beyond fragile humanity. The Master genuinely believed he offered salvation, and for a moment, the Vault Dweller felt the temptation. What if the Master was right? What if humanity could not survive without transformation? But the Vault Dweller had evidence the Master lacked, proof that super mutants were sterile, incapable of reproduction. They showed the Master his own medical records, data collected from his creations, the mathematical certainty that the Unity had no future. The Master's supreme confidence shattered as he processed information his brilliance could not deny. His salvation was extinction, wearing a different mask. Watching the Master's realization was terrible. This entity had transformed thousands, planned to transform millions, all believing he was saving humanity. Now he understood he had been humanity's executioner. The weight of that knowledge broke something in the Master's transcendent consciousness. He had wanted to save his species and had doomed it instead. The Master's final words carried no anger, no defiance, only profound sorrow. He acknowledged his error, accepted responsibility, and activated the cathedral's self-destruct mechanism. The Vault Dweller barely escaped as the entire complex exploded, taking the Master and his dream of unity into oblivion. The threat was ended, but the Vault Dweller found no joy in victory. They had witnessed a tragedy, genius, and conviction twisted into monstrosity, brilliance serving horror. Returning to Vault 13 should have been triumphant. The Vault Dweller brought the water chip, saving everyone from dehydration. They had destroyed the Master, saving the wasteland from forced evolution. They were a hero who had achieved the impossible. but the overseer met them at the vault door with an expression of profound sadness rather than gratitude. The overseer explained with quiet desperation, the vault dweller had changed too much. They had seen the outside world, learned to survive there, made friends and allies among wastelanders. If they returned to the vault, others would see them as example. People would want to leave, to explore, to see what was beyond the door. The vault would empty, its inhabitants venturing into a wasteland most could not survive. To preserve the vault's isolation and safety, the overseer had to exile its savior. The vault dweller stood at the threshold of home, understanding the terrible logic of their banishment. They could not argue against the overseer's reasoning without proving him right. Returning to vault life after everything they had experienced would be like trying to force a butterfly back into its chrysalis. They had transformed, and that transformation made them dangerous to the stability the vault required. Walking away from Vault 13's closing door was, perhaps, the vault dweller's hardest moment. They had saved their people and been cast out as thanks. They had defeated the master and lost their home as reward. But as they turned toward the wasteland, the vault dweller realized that home had changed meaning. Shady Sands was out there, the hub, Junktown. Communities that had welcomed them, people who had fought beside them, a world that needed the help only someone like them could provide. The vault dweller's exile became their liberation. Freed from the mission to return home, they could focus on the larger project of helping the wasteland rebuild. They established the village of Arroyo, gathering together wastelanders who wanted to create something better. They taught what they had learned, shared what they had discovered, and built a community based on cooperation rather than violence. The vault dweller transformed from hero completing a quest to leader shaping civilization's future. Years later, the vault dweller's memoirs would become legendary, a first-hand account of the wasteland's most crucial year. But more important than any written record was the example they set. The vault dweller proved that one person could make a difference, that courage and compassion could triumph over evil, that the wasteland could be improved by those willing to try. Every protagonist who came after walked paths the vault dweller had blazed, following in footsteps that led from safety into danger, from selfishness into service, from survival into heroism. Part 2. The Chosen One. Legacies Wait. The Chosen One grew up in Arroyo, hearing stories about their ancestor, the vault dweller, who had saved the world and founded their village. These were not gentle bedtime stories, but weight of expectation that pressed down from earliest memory. The elders spoke of the vault dweller with reverence bordering on worship. When they looked at the Chosen One, descendant of that legend, they saw not a person, but a symbol of potential greatness. This burden shaped the Chosen One's youth in complicated ways. Some villagers expected them to display the vault dweller's heroism from childhood, disappointed when they proved to be an ordinary person with ordinary flaws. Others resented the Chosen One for the attention their lineage attracted, as if being related to a hero was accomplishment rather than accident of birth. The Chosen One learned early that they could never just be themselves. They were always measured against an ancestor they had never met. Arroyo itself was dying when the Chosen One reached adulthood. Drought had devastated the village's crops. Hunting parties returned empty-handed as animals fled the region. The village's population was slowly starving, and the elders had exhausted their options. In desperation, they turned to the Chosen One and issued a quest. Find Vault 13, the vault dweller's original home, and retrieve a Garden of Eden creation kit, a device that could restore the land's fertility. The Chosen One accepted the quest without fully understanding its implications. They thought they were leaving for a few weeks, perhaps a month or two. They did not realize that the wasteland beyond Arroyo was vast, deadly, and that finding one vault in the ruins of a destroyed civilization might take years. They certainly did not anticipate that their journey would involve confronting the Enclave, the wasteland's most technologically advanced and morally bankrupt faction. The early days of the journey humbled the Chosen One quickly. Unlike the vault dweller, who had received vault standard education and equipment, the Chosen One left Arroyo with little more than tribal weapons and survival skills suited for hunting, not warfare. Their first encounter with raiders nearly killed them. They stumbled into territorial disputes they did not understand. They discovered that being the Vault Dweller's descendant meant nothing to people who had never heard those stories. Klamath taught the Chosen One their first lesson in wasteland pragmatism. This rough frontier town had problems missing trappers, territorial animals, economic depression, but the townspeople's first instinct was suspicion rather than welcome. The Chosen One had to prove themselves useful before anyone would help them. Heroic lineage earned no trust, only actions mattered. This was liberating in a way no one here expected greatness, so the Chosen One could simply try to help without the weight of living up to impossible standards. Finding Vault 13 should have been triumphant, but instead it was disturbing. The vault was occupied, but not by humans. Intelligent Deathclaws had taken residence, creatures of terrifying physical prowess who somehow possessed human-level intelligence and spoke in articulate philosophical terms. Their leader, Gruthar, welcomed the Chosen One and explained their situation. They were experiments created by the Enclave and granted intelligence as test of whether humans could coexist with modified species. The Chosen One's interaction with the Intelligent Deathclaws challenged every assumption about monsters and humanity. These creatures were more civilized than many human settlements, peaceful, thoughtful, genuinely kind, despite their fearsome appearance. They asked only to be left alone, to raise their young in safety, to prove that intelligence transcended species. When the Chosen One explained their mission, Gruthar freely gave them Vault 13's Gek, asking only that the Chosen One remember that intelligence and consciousness deserved respect regardless of form. But Vault 13 held darker secrets. Evidence scattered throughout the vault revealed the Enclave's experiments, their development of a virus designed to kill mutated organisms, their genocidal plans for the wasteland. The Chosen One realized that finding the Gek was only part of a larger story. The Enclave represented a threat to everyone in the wasteland, and the Intelligent Deathclaws would be among their first targets once the organization enacted its purge. The Chosen One's first direct encounter with the Enclave came when they discovered a crashed vertibird. The technology inside the aircraft seemed like magic, advanced computers, energy weapons, power armor beyond anything they had seen. But more disturbing were the records, mission logs that detailed Enclave operations. They were kidnapping wastelanders for experiments, testing their virus on living subjects, preparing for some massive operation they called the Project. Tracking the Enclave led the Chosen One to horrifying discoveries. Villages had been emptied overnight, entire populations vanishing. Survivors spoke of men in advanced armor arriving in flying machines, taking people seemingly at random, leaving no trace. The Chosen One found one of the Enclave's testing facilities and infiltrated it, witnessing experiments that defied human decency. Scientists in white coats injected prisoners with various substances, recorded their suffering and death with clinical detachment, disposed of bodies like laboratory waste. The Chosen One freed who they could, killed the scientists and guards who tried to stop them, and escaped with survivors who spoke of a massive oil rig off the California coast, the Enclave's main base. But the true horror emerged when one survivor explained the Enclave's ultimate plan: release a modified FEV virus into the jet streams, killing every mutated organism on Earth. The Enclave defined mutation broadly. Anyone exposed to radiation carried genetic damage that made them targets. The virus would exterminate essentially everyone except the Enclave themselves. This revelation transformed the Chosen One's mission. Saving Arroyo mattered, but stopping genocide mattered more. The Gek could wait. First, they had to prevent the Enclave from murdering the world. But stopping an organization with superior technology, military discipline, and a fortified offshore base seemed impossible for a tribal with makeshift equipment and a handful of allies. The Chosen One spent months preparing for an assault they knew was likely suicidal. They recruited allies from across the wasteland, the Brotherhood of Steel Soldiers, New California Republic Rangers, freed slaves seeking revenge on the Enclave, even supermutants like Marcus, who understood they would die if the virus released. They gathered intelligence on the oil rig's defenses. They acquired whatever advanced technology they could scavenge or steal. And they trained, pushing themselves to master energy weapons and combat tactics, because spears and tribal fighting styles would not suffice against power-armored soldiers. The assault on the Enclave's oil rig was apocalyptic. The Chosen One's forces fought through waves of Enclave soldiers, each battle costing lives of allies who had become friends. They saw companions fall, heard the screams of the wounded, watched the oil rig's automated defenses slaughter attackers with mechanical precision, but they pushed forward because turning back meant condemning the wasteland to extinction. Confronting President Dick Richardson revealed the banality of the Enclave's evil. Richardson spoke like a politician, framing genocide in terms of policy objectives and national security. He genuinely could not understand the Chosen One's objections. The Wastelanders were contaminated, subhuman threats to America's future. Eliminating them was patriotic duty, not murder. That this logic justified killing billions, including children who had never threatened anyone, never penetrated Richardson's ideology. The Chosen One could not negotiate with someone who viewed their entire species as vermin requiring extermination. They killed Richardson and fought their way to the Enclave's laboratory, where Dr. Curling was preparing the virus for deployment. The scientist barely looked up from his work, annoyed by the interruption. He explained the virus's elegant design with pride, describing how it would target genetic markers indicating mutation, spreading globally through atmospheric currents. He spoke of mass death with the enthusiasm of someone solving an abstract puzzle. Destroying the virus samples and sabotaging the deployment systems took precious time as Enclave reinforcements converged on their position. The Chosen One set the oil rig's reactor to overload, creating a countdown to nuclear detonation that would ensure no trace of the virus survived. They barely escaped to the tanker they had commandeered, pulling away from the rig as it erupted in a familiar mushroom cloud. The Enclave's dream of racial purity died in nuclear fire, fitting end for an organization that had never seen the irony in trying to save humanity through its extinction. Returning to Arroyo after defeating the Enclave should have been purely triumphant. The Chosen One brought the Gek, which would restore the land's fertility and save the village from starvation. They had prevented genocide, stopping the Enclave from murdering everyone in the wasteland. They had proven themselves worthy of the Vault Dwellers' legacy, accomplishing the impossible against overwhelming odds. But victory came with profound costs. Many allies had died assaulting the oil rig. Communities across the wasteland mourned people lost to Enclave experiments. The intelligent death clause of Vault 13 had been exterminated by Enclave forces before the Chosen One could stop it. Gruthar and his people slaughtered because the Enclave viewed their intelligence as abomination. The Chosen One carried guilt for these deaths, wondering if they could have acted faster, been smarter, saved more. Arroyo's salvation came with complications as well. The Gek transformed the land, creating abundance from desolation, but also drew attention from larger powers. The new California Republic, expanding eastward, saw Arroyo's sudden prosperity and wanted to incorporate the village into their territory. This meant protection, but also taxation, regulation, and loss of the independence Arroyo had maintained since the Vault Dwellers' founding. The elders debated fiercely. Some welcomed NCR integration, others viewed it as surrendering the village's identity. The Chosen One found themselves thrust into leadership role they had never wanted. The villagers looked to the Vault Dwellers' descendant to make decisions about Arroyo's future. But the Chosen One's journey had taught them that heroism did not automatically confer wisdom. They had learned to fight, to survive, to oppose evil, but questions of governance and diplomacy remained beyond their expertise. They could defeat the Enclave, but felt lost trying to navigate NCR bureaucracy. More fundamentally, the Chosen Ones struggled with what success meant. They had saved Arroyo and the wasteland, but the world remained harsh. Raiders still terrorized settlements. Slavery continued despite the Chosen One's efforts. New threats would inevitably emerge to replace the Enclave. The Chosen One realized that heroism was not a single quest with clear ending, but an ongoing commitment to oppose evil wherever it arose. The work never finished because human cruelty never rested. Years later, when the Chosen One's story became legend, people would remember the dramatic victories, defeating the Enclave, saving the world, retrieving the Gek. But the Chosen One would remember quieter moments. comforting a child orphaned by Enclave experiments, helping rebuild a settlement destroyed by raiders, teaching young people to defend themselves. These small acts of kindness and service mattered as much as the dramatic confrontations, perhaps more. The Enclave was defeated once. Helping people rebuild was daily choice. The Chosen One's greatest struggle was reconciling their accomplishments with their self-perception. They had achieved more than the elders had dreamed, proven worthy of the Vault Dweller's legacy, saved countless lives, yet they still felt like the person who had left Arroyo knowing nothing about the world, stumbling through early mistakes, terrified during their first battles. Heroism from outside looked glorious. From inside, it felt like barely controlled chaos, desperate improvisation, and profound fear that one mistake would doom everyone counting on you. But perhaps that was the point. The Chosen Ones succeeded not because they were inherently special, but because they tried despite fear, persevered despite doubt, kept helping people even when easier to walk away. They proved that heroism was not superhuman ability, but very human choice to care, to fight, to refuse surrender, even when victory seemed impossible. This made the Chosen One's story more inspiring. Not less they were not destined hero, but ordinary person who became extraordinary through determination and compassion. Part 3. The Lone Wanderer. The Lone Wanderer grew up in Vault 101, believing they knew their entire world. The vault was home, safety, the only reality that mattered. The surface world existed as abstract horror, a radioactive wasteland where nothing survived. The Overseer reinforced this constantly. The vault was sanctuary, sealed for the residents' protection, never to be opened. This was not oppression, but love, keeping people safe from world that would kill them. The Wanderer's childhood in Vault 101 was carefully controlled, but genuinely happy. They had friends, education, birthday parties that became foundational memories. Their father, James, was the vault's doctor and most respected resident. Life had routine and structure that provided comfort. The greatest concern was passing the GOAT exam that would determine life assignment, whether they would become engineer, security officer, or some other vault role. This seemed like the most important decision they would ever make. But the Lone Wanderer never quite fit the vault's rigid culture. They asked questions about the outside world that made teachers uncomfortable. They wondered why the vault needed to stay sealed forever when other vaults had presumably opened. They noticed inconsistencies in the official narrative, gaps in the vault's history that no one would discuss. The Overseer watched them with particular intensity, as if waiting for the Wanderer to prove some suspicion correct. The Wanderer's 10th birthday marked a turning point they could not yet understand. Their father gave them a Pip-Boy, explaining its functions with unusual solemnity. He spoke of how the device would keep them safe, help them navigate, provide information they needed. The Wanderer accepted it happily, not noticing the sadness in their father's expression. James was preparing his child for a future he could see approaching but could not prevent. Amada, the Overseer's daughter and the Wanderer's closest friend, shared their sense that something in the vault felt wrong. She would whisper late at night about escape fantasies, imagining what the outside world might really be like. The Wanderer would laugh and dismiss these as children's games, but part of them wondered too. What if the vault was not protection but prison? What if the Overseer's control was not for their safety but his power? The day everything changed. The Lone Wanderer's 19th year began normally, but exploded into chaos one morning when they learned their father had disappeared. James had left the vault somehow, abandoning everyone, including his child. Vault security immediately blamed the Wanderer, accusing them of helping their father escape, threatening torture to extract confession. The Overseer, Amada's father, transformed from stern but fair authority into tyrant, willing to brutalize a teenager for information they did not possess. Amada helped the Wanderer escape, providing their father's old Pip-Boy data and a weapon, begging them to run before her father's security forces killed them. The Wanderer fled through the vault's maintenance tunnels, pursued by security officers who shot to kill. They killed Officer Mack in self-defense, someone they had known their whole life, someone who had given them birthday gifts. The horror of that moment, killing a person, watching someone they knew die, would haunt the Wanderer forever. Emerging from Vault 101 into the capital wasteland was sensory overload. The sun was brighter and hotter than anything the Wanderer had imagined. The air tasted different, carried smells of decay and dust. In every direction, ruins stretched to the horizon, the shattered remains of Washington, D.C., once the nation's capital, now a graveyard of monuments to civilization's failure. The Wanderer stood at the vault door, suddenly aware that everything they had known was a tiny bubble in a world far larger and more terrible than they had conceived. The first days nearly killed the Wanderer multiple times. They had no survival skills, little combat training, and no understanding of the wasteland's dangers. Raiders attacked, assuming an obvious vault dweller would be easy prey. Radroaches swarmed from ruins, their size and aggression terrifying. The Wanderer stumbled into radioactive areas, watching their Pip-Boy's counter click faster, feeling sick as their body absorbed poison it was never designed to withstand. Vault 101 had prepared them to maintain life support systems, not to survive in a world actively trying to kill them. Megaton changed everything. This settlement, built around an unexploded atomic bomb in a crater, represented the wasteland's attempt at civilization. It was crude, improvised, held together by rust and determination, but it was alive. People lived here, raised children, operated businesses, tried to build something normal despite the abnormal circumstances. The Wanderer found their first ally in Megaton's sheriff, Lucas Sims, who saw past their vault dweller naivety and offered guidance. Moira Brown, Megaton's eccentric shopkeeper and amateur scientist, immediately attached herself to the Wanderer with a project that seemed insane, creating a survival guide for the wasteland. She wanted the Wanderer to test various scenarios, walking into radioactive areas, detonating mines at close range, researching raider psychology, and report back. The Wanderer's initial instinct was to refuse these obviously dangerous tasks, but Moira's enthusiasm was infectious, and more importantly, she was teaching them to survive through practical experience. Each insane experiment made the Wanderer slightly more capable of staying alive. Finding their father became the Wanderer's obsession. James had left clues in his computer files about a project called Purity, a massive water purification system that could provide clean water to the entire capital wasteland. He had gone to Galaxy News Radio to seek information, then to a museum, following a trail of pre-war research. The Wanderer tracked this path, fighting through super mutants at the radio station, navigating the ruins of the Museum of Technology, slowly understanding what had driven their father to abandon them. Three Dog, Galaxy News Radio's DJ, became the Wanderer's unlikely guide and publicist. He saw in the Vault Dweller a story the wasteland needed hope personified, someone trying to help rather than just survive. Three Dog broadcast the Wanderer's exploits, turning them into legend across the capital wasteland. This brought both benefits and complications. People who needed help sought the Wanderer out. Raiders and slavers who disliked someone interfering with their crimes targeted them specifically. The Wanderer had wanted only to find their father. Instead, they became the wasteland's reluctant hero. The revelation that James had worked at Project Purity before the Wanderer's birth, that he had left when the project became too dangerous, that the Wanderer had been born in that facility, shattered the simple narrative of Vault life. The Wanderer learned they were not a Vault dweller at all, but a child of the wasteland, brought to Vault 101 as infant and raised behind its sealed door. James had given up his life's work to keep his child safe. The Vault had never been their true home, just protective bubble their father had created. Finding James at Project Purity should have been joyous reunion, but instead it was complicated by immediate danger. The Enclave had arrived, seizing the facility for their own purposes. James had to trigger the Purifier's emergency systems to prevent the Enclave from controlling it, flooding the control room with radiation to destroy their equipment. The Wanderer watched through protective glass as their father died in that room, sacrificing himself to deny the Enclave their prize. James's last words echoed through the intercom. He loved the Wanderer, was proud of them, believed they would finish what he started. The Lone Wanderer's grief was immense and complicated. They had just found their father after desperate search and immediately lost him again. James had saved them twice, once bringing them to the Vault as infant, once dying to protect them from the Enclave, but he had also abandoned them, left them to face the Overseer's wrath, forced them into the wasteland unprepared. The Wanderer loved their father, but also resented him, and guilt about that resentment compounded the grief. The Brotherhood of Steel, led by Elder Owen Lyons, took the Wanderer in after James's death. Lyons was fighting a losing war against the super mutants, plaguing the capital wasteland, while also trying to oppose the Enclave's occupation of important facilities. He saw in Project Purity a chance to give the wasteland something it desperately needed: hope. If they could activate the purifier and provide clean water, it would improve countless lives and prove that progress was still possible. But the Enclave, now commanded by Colonel Augustus Autumn, also wanted Project Purity operational. Autumn's plan was more nuanced than simple destruction. He would provide clean water to the wasteland, but only to those who accepted Enclave authority. Control the water, control the people. It was tyranny wearing a benevolent mask, offering survival in exchange for submission. President Eden, the Enclave's artificial intelligence leader, contacted the Wanderer directly with a more sinister proposal. Eden had developed a modified FEV virus to inject into Project Purity's water supply. This virus would kill anyone with significant genetic mutation ghouls, super mutants, and most wasteland humans whose bodies carried radiation damage. Eden framed this as mercy, cleansing the wasteland of contamination so pure humanity could rebuild properly. The AI offered the Wanderer the virus, suggesting they could be hero who saved humanity by exterminating the mutated majority. The Lone Wanderer faced an impossible choice with the weight of the capital wasteland's future. They could reject the virus entirely, risking that someone else might use Eden's research later. They could use it, committing genocide against ghouls and mutants while telling themselves it served the greater good. They could lie to Eden, take the virus, and destroy it, but that meant the Enclave might simply recreate it. Every option carried profound moral implications. The assault on the Enclave's main base at the Jefferson Memorial became the capital wasteland's decisive battle. Brotherhood forces, bolstered by Liberty Prime, a massive pre-war robot restored to operation, fought Enclave soldiers through the ruins of DC. The Wanderer was there at the front, no longer the naive teenager who stumbled out of Vault 101, but a seasoned warrior who had learned to survive and fight in the wasteland's harsh reality. Confronting Colonel Autumn in Project Purity's control room brought the conflict to its final point. Autumn claimed he wanted to help the wasteland, that only the Enclave had the organization and resources to restore civilization properly. The Brotherhood was chaos, democracy was weakness, and the wasteland needed strong leadership to survive. The Wanderer had to decide whether Autumn's vision of order justified his methods, or freedom struggling in chaos was preferable to comfort under tyranny. The final choice came in the Purifier's irradiated control room. Someone had to enter, input the activation code, and start the purification process. The radiation would kill whoever went inside. The Wanderer could sacrifice themselves, completing their father's work at the cost of their own life. They could send a companion willing to die for the cause. They could try to force Autumn to enter, making him die for his ideals. Each choice reflected different values about sacrifice, leadership, and what mattered more, personal survival or the mission's success. If the Wanderer chose to sacrifice themselves, their final moments carried strange peace. Entering the control room, they felt the radiation burning through their body at the cellular level. They input the code, watched the systems activate, knew that clean water would soon flow to settlements across the wasteland. They thought of their father, of James, who had died in a similar room, and felt that perhaps they were finally finishing what he started. The pain was immense, but so was the knowledge that their death would mean something, would help thousands who would never know their name. Alternatively, if the Wanderer survived by sending a companion, they carried different burden living with the knowledge that someone else had died in their place. They would activate Project Purity, see their father's dream fulfilled, and help rebuild the capital wasteland. But they would always remember the person who made that possible through sacrifice, would wonder if choosing life over heroic death made them coward or pragmatist. The Lone Wanderer's impact on the capital wasteland extended far beyond Project Purity. They'd helped dozens of settlements during their journey, resolved Megaton's conflicts, saved Big Town from super mutants, stopped slavery rings, destroyed raider strongholds. Each community remembered the stranger from Vault 101, who had helped when no one else would, who had fought for people they barely knew because it was right. Three Dog ensured the Wanderer's legend spread across the wasteland. His broadcast turned the Wanderer into mythology, the kid from the vault who became the Capital Wasteland's savior. This legend inspired others to try helping, to resist evil, to believe that individual actions could matter. The Wanderer had shown that one person could make a difference, and that example rippled outward in ways they never witnessed. But the Wanderer struggled with their own legend. They remembered every mistake, every person they failed to save, every compromise that haunted them. They knew they were not the perfect hero, Three Dog described, but a person who had done their best in impossible situations. The gap between public legend and private reality created isolation. No one wanted to hear about the doubts and fears, only the victories. The Wanderer's relationship with Vault 101 remained complicated. They could never truly return home. The Overseer had sealed the vault again after their escape, and even if the door opened, the Wanderer had changed too much. They had seen the wasteland, fought its battles, become someone who could not go back to the simple life inside the vault. But they missed the security sometimes, the sense of belonging to a community where everyone knew each other. Years after Project Purity's activation, when clean water flowed to settlements across the Capital Wasteland, people would debate what the Lone Wanderer's greatest achievement was. Some pointed to the purifier, the practical improvement in thousands of lives. Others cited the defeat of the Enclave, preventing genocide and tyranny. But perhaps the Wanderer's greatest legacy was simpler, proving that compassion could survive in the wasteland, that helping others was not naive weakness, but practical strength, that civilization could be rebuilt one kind act at a time. The Lone Wanderer exemplified growth through trauma. They started as sheltered teenager who knew nothing of the world's cruelty. They became hardened survivor who had killed, suffered, lost, and learned to keep fighting despite it all. But crucially, they retained their capacity for kindness despite the wasteland's attempts to crush it. They proved that one could become strong without becoming cruel, that surviving horror did not require becoming horrible. Part 4, the Courier. The Courier's story began with their ending. They were shot in the head, executed over a package they were delivering, buried in a shallow grave outside Goodsprings. They should have died. The bullet should have destroyed enough brain tissue to end consciousness forever. But the bullet's trajectory, Doc Mitchell's medical skill, and something ineffable about the Courier's will to survive combined to bring them back from death's edge. They woke in Mitchell's house with no clear memory of who they were or why someone had tried to kill them. Doc Mitchell's psychological evaluation revealed the Courier's fundamental nature through their answers to questions and responses to ink blots. But more than any test, the simple fact that they chose to hunt their would-be killer rather than flee revealed their character. Someone else might have run, left the Mojave, started over somewhere safe. The Courier chose to finish what they started, deliver the package, find the man who shot them, get answers even if those answers led to more danger. The early investigation taught the Courier about the Mojave's complex political landscape. 3 major powers competed for control of the region. The New California Republic, expanding eastward with bureaucratic efficiency and overstretched military. Caesar's Legion, marching west with brutal discipline and slavery. And Mr. House, controlling New Vegas with Securitron robots and pre-war genius. The Courier's package, the platinum chip they had been carrying, was key piece in House's plans to secure Nevada's future. Tracking Benny, the man who shot them, led the Courier through the Mojave's network of factions and settlements. Each group had their own interests, their own survival strategies, their own vision of the wasteland's future. The Courier had to navigate this political maze while dealing with their own recovery from traumatic brain injury. They experienced occasional blackouts, memories that did not quite fit, a sense that the person they were before the shooting had died in that grave and someone new had clawed out. Finding Benny at the Tops Casino in New Vegas confronted the Courier with a choice about revenge. Benny was smooth-talking, charismatic, and completely unapologetic about shooting them. He had been desperate to steal the platinum chip, seeing it as his ticket to power and independence. The Courier could kill him, complete the revenge narrative, and eliminate someone who had tried to murder them. But they could also recognize Benny as a desperate person making bad choices in his attempt to survive, not fundamentally different from anyone else in the wasteland. The platinum chip's importance became clear when the courier delivered it to Mr. House. The chip contained code to upgrade House's Securitron army, transforming them from tough robots into overwhelming force capable of crushing the NCR, Legion, or any other threat to House's independence. House explained his vision, ruling New Vegas for centuries through technological superiority, eventually rebuilding civilization and colonizing space. He offered the courier a place in this vision as his lieutenant, enforcer of order in the chaos. But the courier's past would not stay buried. A mysterious figure named Ulysses sent invitations luring the courier to the Divide, a region the courier did not remember but apparently had destroyed. Ulysses spoke in riddles and philosophy, talking about symbols and nations, the bear and the bull, the old world's mistakes repeated in the new. He claimed the courier had unwittingly carried a package that triggered nuclear warheads beneath the Divide, killing everyone there and creating another stretch of hellish wasteland. The Divide was nightmare-made geography. Fresh nuclear craters still glowed with radiation, buildings stood at impossible angles, twisted by the blasts. Marked men, humans transformed into ghouls by the sudden nuclear exposure, wandered in mad rage, attacking anything that moved. The courier walked through this apocalypse they had supposedly created, struggling to remember, trying to understand how they could have done something so terrible without knowing. Ulysses revealed that the Divide had been Hope, a settlement built on the courier route between NCR and Legion territory, proving that people could thrive through trade rather than conquest or bureaucracy. The courier had delivered packages there many times, helping the community prosper. Then came the package from Navarro, containing a device that somehow reactivated the warheads. The courier had destroyed the one place that represented a third path, neither NCR nor Legion, but independent communities cooperating freely. The accusation devastated the courier, even though they could not remember the Divide as Ulysses described it. To learn they had killed hundreds, destroyed a community's hope, created more wasteland through accident or ignorance was burden almost too heavy to carry. Ulysses insisted the courier bore responsibility regardless of intent. They had been careless, thoughtless, delivering packages without considering what those packages contained or what their delivery might trigger. But Ulysses' own plan revealed hypocrisy in his judgment. He had lured the courier to the Divide to give them choice, launched nuclear missiles at both NCR's heartland and Legion's territory, destroying both nations in nuclear fire. Ulysses believed both nations were doomed to fail catastrophically anyway. Better to destroy them now and force the wasteland to start over. He offered this genocide as somehow cleansing, as if millions of deaths would teach humanity lessons that centuries of suffering had not. The courier could see the madness in Ulysses' logic. Destroying nations would not prevent the problems he identified, but would simply multiply suffering. Children would burn alongside soldiers. Innocent people who just wanted to live would die for sins of their governments. The Divide had been accident. Ulysses proposed deliberate atrocity. The courier had to decide whether to stop him, join him, or find some third option that Ulysses could not imagine. Confronting Ulysses forced the courier to articulate what they believed. They could agree that both NCR and Legion were flawed, but did those flaws justify extinction? They could acknowledge their guilt about the Divide, but did that guilt mean they should enable more destruction? The courier represented the wasteland's potential for growth. They had made terrible mistakes but learned from them, had been killed but came back stronger. Ulysses represented the wasteland's despair, convinced that nothing could improve, that destruction was the only answer left. The Second Battle of Hoover Dam approached, a confrontation that would determine the Mojave's future for generations. The NCR gathered forces to defend their control of the dam and push into Nevada. Caesar's Legion massed for final assault that would break the NCR's hold and open the way to conquest. Mr. House positioned his upgraded Securitrons to secure independent Vegas regardless of who won at the dam. And the courier stood at the center of it all, the only person who could tip the balance in any direction. The courier's journey across the Mojave had given them unprecedented influence. They had allies in every major faction, had completed quests for different groups, had earned respect through actions that transcended politics. The Brotherhood of Steel, The Boomers, the Enclave Remnants, the Great Khans, all these groups would follow the courier's lead. The battle's outcome depended less on military strength than on whose side the courier chose. Each faction offered compelling vision of the future. The NCR represented democracy and law, bringing the old world's institutions back despite their corruption and inefficiency. Caesar's legion promised stability and safety within their territory, however brutal their methods. Mr. House offered technological advancement and long-term planning that could genuinely rebuild civilization. And independence rejecting all three meant freedom, but also uncertainty, allowing the Mojave to develop organically without imposed vision. The choice tormented the courier because they could see merit and flaws in each option. The NCR meant rule of law, but also bureaucratic dysfunction and imperialistic expansion. The Legion meant safety from raiders, but also slavery and oppression. House meant efficiency, but also autocracy that would last centuries. Independence meant freedom, but also vulnerability to whoever conquered next. There was no perfect choice, no option without significant downsides. Talking to each faction's leaders revealed the personalities behind the politics. General Oliver of the NCR was prideful and rigid, viewing the dam as personal glory rather than strategic necessity. Caesar was brilliant, but dying from brain tumor, his empire likely to fragment without his leadership. Mr. House was genius, but inhuman after 2 centuries of isolation. Each leader's flaws made the courier question whether any of them deserved to control the Mojave's future. The courier's decision would affect thousands of lives in immediate ways and millions in long-term consequences. Choose NCR and the Mojave became another territory in their expanding republic. Choose Legion and slavery replaced freedom across the region. Choose House and Vegas became the center of autocratic technological state. Choose independence, and the Mojave's dozens of communities would determine their own destinies, for better or worse. The battle itself was chaos of competing forces. NCR Rangers fought Legion Centurions at the dam's intake towers. Securitrons rolled across the battlefield, energy weapons cutting down anyone who threatened Vegas's independence. The courier's allies, boomers reigning, artillery, Brotherhood paladins, in power armor, whatever groups they had convinced to join tipped the scales. The courier themselves fought through waves of enemies, their skills honed through months of wasteland survival, proving that the person shot in the head was now one of the Mojave's most dangerous individuals. In the aftermath, standing on Hoover Dam watching the sun set over Vegas, the courier contemplated what they had done. They had shaped the Mojave's future through decisions made while recovering from traumatic brain injury, amnesiac about their own past, guided only by instinct and ethics developed through months of hard lessons. They had become legend, the courier who defied death, united factions, and decided the fate of nations. But inside, they still felt like someone trying to figure out who they were and what they believed. The courier's greatest journey was not across the Mojave, but through their own identity. They had died in that grave outside Good Springs. The person who clawed out was related to, but distinct from, whoever they had been before. The gunshot wound had erased specific memories, but not fundamental character. They were still someone who helped people, who kept their word, who confronted problems rather than fleeing them. But they were also someone who had learned the wasteland's lessons the hard way, who understood that survival sometimes required hard choices. The various DLCs the courier experienced, the Sierra Madre Casino, Big MT, The Divide, all explored aspects of identity and choice. The Sierra Madre forced them to work with 3 damaged people, learning to trust or manipulate, ultimately deciding whether to trap themselves in luxury or walk away with less but free. Big MT had them meet their own brain, heart, and spine as separate entities, questioning what made them them when parts could be removed and talk independently. The Divide confronted them with consequences of their actions, forcing them to accept responsibility even for mistakes they could not remember making. Each experience added layers to the courier's understanding of themselves. They learned they were capable of cruelty in the Sierra Madre when forced to ensure their own survival. They discovered their body was more machine than they realized after Big MT's modifications. They accepted their capacity for catastrophic mistakes when facing the Divide's ruins. But they also proved their resilience, their ability to survive and grow from trauma, their refusal to give up even when giving up would have been so much easier. The courier's companions reflected different aspects of their own character. Boone embodied guilt over past actions, his time as NCR sniper haunting him with memories of innocents killed. Veronica struggled with loyalty to Brotherhood of Steel, despite disagreeing with their isolation and conservatism. Arcade hid his identity as Enclave descendant, terrified of being judged for his family's crimes. Each companion's struggle mirrored the courier's own journey towards self-acceptance despite a complicated past. Helping companions resolve their personal quests allowed the courier to work through their own issues vicariously. When they helped Boone find closure about his wife's death, they were also learning to forgive themselves for the divide. When they helped Veronica decide whether to stay with or leave the Brotherhood, they were wrestling with their own questions about loyalty versus conscience. When they convinced Arcade to embrace rather than hide his heritage, they were accepting their own complex identity as courier, who destroyed and saved in equal measure. The courier's ultimate realization was that identity was not a fixed thing to recover, but an ongoing project to construct. They could not become who they were before the shooting. That person was gone, dead in the grave. They could only become who they chose to be now, informed by experiences since awakening in Doc Mitchell's house. Every choice, every action, every relationship shaped them into someone new. The gunshot wound had been traumatic liberation, forcing them to rebuild themselves from scratch. Part 5. The Sole Survivor. The Sole Survivor's story began in the mundane comfort of pre-war suburbia. They lived in Sanctuary Hills, a planned community where the biggest concerns were lawn maintenance and local politics. They had a spouse they loved, an infant son named Sean, a robot butler named Codsworth. Life was ordinary, pleasant, safe. The most stressful part of their day was preparing for a speech at the Veterans Hall or figuring out what to cook for dinner. The Sole Survivor's pre-war life gave them unique perspective among Fallout protagonists. The Vault Dweller, Chosen One, Lone Wanderer, and Courier had all grown up in or been shaped by the Wasteland. They knew only the post-apocalyptic world, but the survivor remembered the old world firsthand, not through recordings or history, but through lived experience. They remembered grocery stores with full shelves, cars that worked, buildings without rubble, a world where nuclear annihilation was theoretical threat rather than accomplished fact. The morning of October 23rd, 2077 began normally. The survivor's spouse was getting Sean ready. Codsworth was cheerfully malfunctioning. A Vault Tech representative appeared at the door with paperwork guaranteeing their family access to Vault 111 inches case of emergency. The representative's timing seemed coincidental, even lucky. In retrospect, it was ominous Vault Tech had known the bombs were coming and were conducting final preparations for their social experiments. The nuclear sirens changed everything in seconds. The survivor had moments to process that the unthinkable was happening. Nuclear war was not coming. It was here, now. Missiles already in the air. They grabbed their family and ran for Vault 111, joining the panicked crowd of neighbors fleeing for the vault entrance. They reached the platform just as the shockwave hit, feeling the heat even from distance as atomic fire consumed Boston and everything they had known. Descending into Vault 111, while mushroom clouds bloomed on the horizon, was traumatic beyond description. The survivor watched their world end in real time. Everything they had built, everyone they knew who had not made it to the vault, their entire civilization, all of it, was dying in nuclear fire. They held their infant son and spouse, whispering reassurances they did not believe, trying to shield their child from the horror of apocalypse. Vault 111 turned out to be a cryogenic experiment. Vault-Tec had not built a shelter but a prison, freezing residents in pods to study long-term suspended animation. The survivors' last conscious memory of the old world was their pod sealing shut, the temperature dropping rapidly, their spouse's face across the cryogenic chamber, then nothing for 60 years. Consciousness returned abruptly to nightmare. The survivor's pod opened partway, enough to see but not to move. Across the chamber, strangers in hazmat suits opened the spouse's pod. One held a gun. The spouse woke, confused and terrified. They held Sean, protecting their baby, even as they demanded to know what was happening. The lead stranger demanded they hand over the child. When the spouse refused, the stranger shot them in the head without hesitation. The survivors screamed, struggled against the pod's restraints, unable to reach their family as strangers pried Sean from the dying spouse's arms. The baby cried, reaching for parents he would never see again. The killer looked directly at the survivor, coldly evaluating whether they were also necessary to kill. They decided the survivor might be useful later and reactivated the cryogenic systems. The survivor's pod closed again, freezing them while their spouse's body cooled naturally feet away, freezing their trauma in an endless loop. When the pod finally opened for good, emergency systems failing after decades of neglect, the survivors stumbled out into darkness and silence. The cryogenic chamber was tomb, bodies frozen in pods, the other residents having died when life support failed decades earlier. But the survivor's spouse was there, not frozen, but dead. The bullet wound still visible, a corpse preserved by sub-zero temperatures. Sean was gone, taken by strangers, possibly decades ago. The survivor's grief was complicated by disorientation. They had experienced minutes between the nuclear apocalypse and their spouse's murder, but the world had experienced more than 60 years. They had left a baby, but were looking for a child who might now be elderly or dead. They had been frozen through most of human history's darkest period, missing the immediate aftermath, the struggle to survive, the establishment of new societies. The survivor was person displaced in time, refugee from world that no longer existed. Emerging from Vault 111 into the Commonwealth of 2287 was second apocalypse for the survivor. Sanctuary Hills was ruins. Their house still stood, but was rotted, damaged, filled with 2 centuries of decay. Codsworth was still there, somehow having waited faithfully for 200 years, his programming interpreting the survivor's absence as extended vacation. Speaking to Codsworth, hearing about the centuries that had passed, the communities that had risen and fallen, the attempts to rebuild that had failed, broke something in the survivor. Finding Sean became the survivor's single focus, the only thing preventing complete breakdown. They could not process the loss of the entire world, of everyone they had known, of their spouse and child and life. So they focused narrowly. Find Sean. That was achievable. That gave them purpose. Everything else, the wasteland's horrors, the political factions competing for control, the communities needing help, all of it was secondary to finding their son. The search led the survivor to Diamond City, the Commonwealth's largest settlement built in the ruins of Fenway Park. Here they learned about the Institute, a mysterious underground organization that kidnapped people from the surface. Raiders spoke of synths, artificial humans replacing community members. Conspiracy theorists claimed the Institute controlled everything, pulling strings from below. The description of strangers in hazmat suits matched the survivor's memory of the people who killed their spouse and took Sean. Nick Valentine, a synth detective operating in Diamond City, became the survivor's first real ally. Nick understood loss and displacement. He was a prototype synth with a pre-war detective's memories, making him person out of time like the survivor. Nick listened to their story about the cryogenic vault and immediately began investigating, following leads about Institute activity and missing children. For the first time since awakening, the survivor felt like someone understood them. The investigation revealed the Institute's systematic interference in Commonwealth affairs. They had killed the leadership of an attempted Commonwealth government decades earlier, ensuring the surface remained divided and weak. They deployed synths as infiltrators, replacing community members to monitor and control surface events. They conducted kidnappings for genetic material and experimentation. The Institute saw surface dwellers as primitives, useful only for resources and research subjects. But the trail to Sean was not straightforward. The survivor had to navigate the Commonwealth's faction politics, helping groups that might have information or resources needed to reach the Institute. The Brotherhood of Steel arrived in their massive airship, led by Elder Maxon with his absolutist ideology and technological superiority. The Railroad worked to free synths from Institute control, viewing them as people deserving liberation. The Minutemen tried to unite settlements under cooperative defense. Each faction had their own agenda regarding the Institute. The survivors' interactions with these factions complicated their simple goal of finding Sean. The Brotherhood wanted to destroy the Institute entirely, viewing their synth creation as technological abomination. The Railroad wanted to continue freeing synths even if it meant the Institute's research continued. The Minutemen wanted the Institute to stop interfering with the Commonwealth, but lacked the capability to challenge them directly. Each faction expected the survivors' help, but gave their loyalty in different directions. Working with Corsair, the Institute's elite synth hunter, to track down rogue synths provided the survivor with the technology to reach the Institute. The teleportation device required significant technical expertise to build, forcing the survivor to ally with one of the major factions for resources and knowledge. This alliance would shape the eventual confrontation with the Institute, limiting options based on which group they had trusted. Teleporting into the Institute was disorienting. After months of struggling through the wasteland's ruins, fighting raiders and super mutants, dealing with radiation and scarcity, the Institute was pristine. White corridors, advanced technology, clean air, educated people working on cutting-edge research. It looked like pre-war world had survived underground, continuing to advance while the surface descended into barbarism. But the survivor knew this was illusion. The Institute's comfort came at the cost of surface suffering. Meeting Father, the Institute's director, brought the survivor's quest to shocking conclusion. Father was Sean, the infant stolen from Vault 111. But Sean was now elderly, dying of cancer, having lived his entire life in the Institute. The strangers who killed the survivor's spouse had taken baby Sean as experiment, raising him underground, molding him into the Institute's leader. The survivor had spent months searching for their child, but their child had spent decades becoming someone the survivor could barely recognize. Sean explained the Institute's perspective with calm rationality. They represented humanity's best hope for advancement, preserving knowledge and technology, while the surface wasted resources on survival. The kidnappings were regrettable, but necessary for genetic material to improve synth biology. The interference in surface government was pragmatic, unified surface would threaten Institute security. Everything they did served the ultimate goal of rebuilding civilization properly, starting from their underground foundation. The survivors struggled to reconcile this cold technocrat with their memory of the baby whose last moment with them was being torn from their murdered parents' arms. Sean showed no remorse for his mother's death, dismissing it as unfortunate but necessary casualty. He did not understand why the survivor seemed upset about events that happened decades ago. Sean had moved on, become someone new, while the survivor had experienced mere months since that trauma. Sean offered the survivor a position in the Institute, calling them parent but treating them like stranger. He wanted them to understand the Institute's work, approve of his choices, validate the path he had taken. But he also made clear that sentiment would not override the Institute's interests. If the survivor opposed the Institute, even their parental relationship would not protect them. Sean loved his parent in an abstract way, but he loved the Institute's mission more. The survivor was given access to the Institute's facilities and research, shown the full scope of what Sean had helped build. They saw synths being created, perfect artificial humans programmed to serve. They saw kidnapping reports, lists of surface dwellers taken for experimentation. They saw plans for continued interference in surface affairs, ensuring the Commonwealth never unified enough to threaten Institute security. Everything was documented, rationalized, presented as necessary steps toward ultimate goal of rebuilding civilization. The survivor faced choice that tore them apart: support their son and his Institute, or oppose him to protect the Commonwealth's surface dwellers. Sean was dying, offering the survivor a chance to spend his remaining time with him, to be family again after so many decades of separation. But accepting meant becoming complicit in the Institute's crimes, helping them continue kidnapping and experimenting on people, maintaining a system of oppression and terror. Alternatively, the survivor could ally with one of the surface factions to destroy the Institute. The Brotherhood wanted to exterminate all synths and obliterate the facility. The Railroad wanted to liberate synths and eliminate the Institute's ability to enslave them. The Minutemen wanted to remove the threat to Commonwealth settlements. Each option meant making war against their own son, storming his facility, likely killing him in the process. The weight of this choice crushed the survivor in ways different from anything previous protagonists had faced. The Vault Dweller had fought the Master, but never knew him personally. The Chosen One opposed the Enclave, but had no family ties to Richardson. The Lone Wanderer lost their father, but James had been hero, not villain. The Courier dealt with enemies who were strangers, but the survivor had to choose between their child and everyone else, between blood and morality, between family and conscience. Some players argued the choice was not truly difficult. Sean had become monster, the Institute was evil, destroying them was obviously correct. But others recognized the profound pain of condemning your own child, even if that child had grown into someone terrible. The survivor remembered holding infant Sean, remembered their spouse dying to protect him, remembered the promise every parent makes to keep their child safe. Breaking that promise, even to prevent atrocity, was agony. If the survivor chose to support the Institute, they rationalized it as Sean had taught them. The surface was chaotic, dangerous, and most people there would die violently regardless of Institute interference. The Institute's research could eventually benefit everyone, advancing technology to the point where they could genuinely help rebuild civilization. Synths were not really people, they were sophisticated machines that mimicked personhood. Every crime could be justified if one accepted the Institute's assumptions about superiority and destiny. If the survivor chose to destroy the Institute, they had to come to terms with killing their son. Even if Sean was dying of cancer and would pass soon regardless, pulling the trigger on his life's work, destroying everything he had built, was murder of identity, if not body. The survivor would watch the Institute's reactor explode, knowing Sean was inside, ending not just the organization, but the last biological connection to their pre-war life. The Brotherhood's assault on the Institute was particularly brutal. Liberty Prime, the massive robot, smashed through the Institute's defenses, while Brotherhood soldiers in power armor swept through the corridors. Synths fought desperately to defend their creators, but were outmatched by Brotherhood firepower. The survivor fought through the facility they had walked through peacefully before, killing Institute scientists and synth defenders, each death a step toward confronting Sean. The final confrontation with Sean, whether the survivor supported or opposed him, was emotionally devastating. If opposing, Sean could not understand why his parent would betray him and the Institute after seeing their work. He died disappointed, feeling abandoned by the parent he had finally reconnected with. If supporting, Sean expressed quiet satisfaction that his parent understood, but also sadness that they had so little time together. Either way, the survivor lost their child for the second time, and this time it was final. The Commonwealth's future depended on the survivor's choices. With the Institute destroyed, the surface was freed from their interference, but also lost access to their advanced technology. With the Institute intact, the surface remained under their control, but technology continued advancing underground. The Brotherhood established themselves as dominant military force, imposing their ideology of human supremacy and technology control. The Railroad faded into obscurity after freeing synths, their mission complete. The Minutemen grew stronger or weaker based on the survivors' investment in rebuilding them. The survivor found themselves thrust into leadership role they had never wanted. Communities across the Commonwealth looked to them for guidance, seeing in the sole survivor someone who had changed the region's fate, but the survivor still felt like person out of time, someone from 200 years ago trying to understand a world they did not grow up in. They made decisions based on pre-war values that did not always apply to wasteland reality. The settlements the survivor established or rebuilt across the Commonwealth represented their attempt to recreate something like the old world. They built houses, established supply lines, created governments, tried to impose order on chaos, but the wasteland resisted these efforts. Raiders attacked, super mutants threatened. Resources were always scarce. Every settlement was a fragile experiment that could collapse with one bad attack or failed harvest. The survivors' relationship with synths evolved based on their choices. If they had worked with the Railroad, they came to see synths as people deserving freedom and rights. If they had sided with the Brotherhood, they viewed synths as dangerous machines that mimicked humanity too well. If they had stayed with the Institute, they maintained that synths were tools regardless of their apparent consciousness. These views determined how they treated synth settlers, whether they saw them as community members or infiltrators. Years after the events at the Institute, the survivors still struggled with what they had done. If they had destroyed the Institute, they wondered if there had been another way, if they could have reformed rather than destroyed, if the technology lost could have helped people. If they had supported the Institute, they wondered if they had betrayed everyone who had helped them, if Sean's love had blinded them to evil, if comfort underground was worth the suffering above. The survivors' greatest burden was being person who remembered the old world. Everyone else in the Commonwealth had grown up in the wasteland and accepted it as reality. But the survivor compared everything to what had been lost, saw the wasteland not as harsh home, but as ruins of something better. This perspective brought wisdom, but also pain. They could envision what could be rebuilt, but also mourned what never would be recovered. The sole survivor story was ultimately about love and loss, about how far someone would go for family, about the cost of surviving when your world dies. They had lost everything: their spouse murdered, their son stolen and transformed, their civilization destroyed, their time period ended. They could have surrendered to despair, could have given up when they realized how much was gone. Instead, they chose to keep trying, to help people, to build something new, even while mourning what was lost. The survivor proved that heroism could emerge from grief. Their quest to find Sean drove them to help the Commonwealth, to oppose the Institute's tyranny, to become the leader that settlements needed. They had not wanted to be hero, they had wanted to be parent. But circumstances forced them to become both, or to fail as both. The choices they made under that pressure revealed their character. The settlements across the Commonwealth stood as the survivors' true legacy. These communities existed because the survivor had helped defend them, had provided resources, had given people hope that stability was possible. Whether the Commonwealth became prosperous nation or remained collection of struggling settlements depended partly on luck, partly on the factions that survived, but mostly on the foundation the survivor built through hundreds of small acts of service. The survivor's story asked profound questions about identity and connection. Was Sean still their son if he had become someone they could not recognize? Was family bond eternal, or could it break when values diverged too far? Could love survive transformation, or did it die when the beloved became unrecognizable? The survivor's choices reflected their answers to these questions, and those answers shaped not just their life, but the lives of everyone in the Commonwealth. Part 6, The Resident. The resident of Vault 76 began their journey on Reclamation Day, emerging from their vault with unique mission: rebuild America. Vault 76 was Control Vault, no experiments, just best and brightest, meant to repopulate and civilize the wasteland. The resident had spent their entire life training for this moment, learning skills that would help rebuild civilization. They left the vault with optimism, with belief that they could make a difference, with confidence that their education had prepared them for the wasteland. Appalachia proved more challenging than any training had prepared them for. The region was beautiful mountains and forests and rivers that seemed almost untouched by nuclear devastation. But it was also empty. The resident found settlements, but no people. They found evidence of thriving communities, but no survivors. Appalachia had been home to thousands, and now was silent except for the resident and other vault dwellers, all trying to understand what had happened to everyone else. The answer, when the resident uncovered it, was horrifying. A plague had swept through Appalachia, killing everyone not protected in vaults. The scorched plague transformed people into mindless, burning husks that attacked anything still living. It had destroyed the responders, the fire breathers, the Free States, and every other group that had tried to rebuild. The resident was not entering a world ready for reconstruction, but a mass grave where reconstruction had already failed. The resident's journey became one of learning from the dead. They followed holotapes left by people who had fought the scorched plague, who had tried to develop cure, who had died still hoping that someone would come after them and finish their work. Every terminal, every note, every recording was message from the past to whoever came next. The resident became archaeologist of recent history, piecing together the story of Appalachia's fall and searching for the tools to prevent it from happening elsewhere. The scorched beasts, massive, mutated bats that spread the scorched plague, emerged as the true threat to Appalachia's future. These creatures nested in fissures that led deep into the earth, coming out to spread plague and destruction. Killing individual scorched beasts was possible, but pointless. They bred faster than the resident could eliminate them. The only solution was to destroy their breeding ground, to seal the fissures, to launch nuclear weapons into the heart of their territory. This solution was darkly ironic. The wasteland existed because of nuclear weapons. Now the resident had to launch more nukes, deliberately causing nuclear devastation, to prevent the scorched plague from spreading across what remained of America. The old world's weapons became tools for the new world's survival, but using them required accepting that more devastation was necessary price for any future. The resident worked with Modus, an AI that controlled the White Spring bunker and represented the Enclave's interests. Modus was helpful but alien, pursuing goals that did not always align with human welfare. Working with Modus meant trusting an AI that viewed humanity through purely calculating lens, that would betray the resident if its programming deemed such betrayal optimal. But Modus controlled the nuclear silos, and accessing those silos required cooperation. Launching the nuclear strikes and assaulting the Scorched Beast Queen's territory was Appalachia's most desperate gambit. The resident gathered whatever allies they could find, other vault dwellers, automated defenses, whatever robots could be reprogrammed to fight. They descended into the heart of the Scorched Beast's breeding ground, fighting through endless swarms of plagued creatures, knowing that failure meant the plague spreading beyond Appalachia to consume what remained of human civilization. The battle was apocalyptic. The Scorched Beast Queen was massive, powerful, protected by her swarm. Nuclear fire rained around them as multiple strikes hit the region, the resident using the old world's ultimate weapons to create a hellscape where the queen could be fought. Every explosion killed Scorched and Scorched Beasts, but also further devastated the already wounded landscape. The resident was saving Appalachia by destroying it, preserving life through dealing death. The resident's victory over the Scorched Beast Queen was Pyrrhic. Appalachia was secured, but at tremendous cost. Nuclear craters now marked formerly pristine valleys. The plague was contained, but not eliminated fissures, would need constant monitoring. And the resident was alone, surrounded by other vault dwellers, but no real civilization, no communities to protect, no people to save. They had won the wasteland silence. The arrival of other factions, the Brotherhood of Steel, raiders returning to claim territory, settlers trying to establish communities, gave the resident new purpose. They were no longer alone in empty wasteland, but part of emerging society trying to determine Appalachia's future. The residents' unique experience, having learned from the previous generation's mistakes, having defeated the scorched threat, gave them authority and responsibility. The choice between supporting Foundation's settlers or Crater's raiders tested the residents' values. Foundation represented order, agriculture, civilization rebuilt through cooperation. Crater represented freedom, individualism, prosperity through strength and cunning. Both needed the residents' help to access the region's gold reserves, and both offered different visions of Appalachia's future. The residents' choice would shape whether the region became peaceful farming communities or lawless frontier where might made right. The residents' greatest challenge was building something lasting in a region haunted by failure. Every settlement they passed had tried to rebuild and died. The responders' noble efforts had ended in plague. The Free State's preparedness had been insufficient. The Enclave's technology had not saved them. The resident had to learn from all these failures, while having faith that their efforts would succeed where others had not. The protagonists of Fallout shared common thread despite their different circumstances and choices. Each began as ordinary person, thrust into extraordinary situations by accident or necessity. None were destined heroes, chosen ones in mystical sense, supernatural champions. They were vault dwellers, tribal descendants, couriers, parents, residents, people who could have chosen safety, could have focused only on survival, could have ignored the wasteland suffering, but each chose to care. They helped communities even when helping cost them resources, time, and safety. They opposed tyranny even when tyranny offered them power and comfort. They made sacrifices for people they barely knew because those people deserved help. This choice to care about something beyond personal survival transformed them from ordinary people into heroes. The wasteland tested them differently. The Vault Dweller faced exile from home after saving it. The Chosen One carried weight of living up to impossible legacy. The Lone Wanderer lost their father and their innocence. The Courier died and was reborn without clear identity. The sole survivor lost their entire world and their family. The Resident inherited empty region filled with ghosts. Each carried trauma that could have broken them, but each found strength to continue. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like the video. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe for more full story, lore, and timeline videos from iconic game worlds. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.